But today, I plan to start sounding the alarm, both from the standpoint of the process and the substance, on what is known about the Republican tax plan as of this afternoon. This morning, the House passed the budget, so now it is on to tax. The debate, if the Republicans have their way, will happen at the speed of light. If they have their way, this all could be wrapped up before most Americans have even been able to put a dent in their holiday shopping. That is exactly what the majority Republicans are counting on. They are rushing to drive the tax giveaway to the super wealthy, the powerful corporations, and do it so quickly that most of America really has no idea what is going on. Their hope is simple: do it in a way so that nobody catches on. So this afternoon, as the ranking Democrat on the Finance Committee, I'm going to look at this from a few different angles. First, the process, and then the policy that is on offer from the Republicans as of right now. Right off the top, I'm sure that senators have heard that here in the Senate, in the Congress, there's going to be a real debate. It's going to play out in a careful and deliberate way. There's going to be plenty of give and take. As of right now, my message to the American people is, you've been fooled. Don't buy that. Here's what's going to happen. Anybody who expects a repeat of the kind of bipartisan, deliberate process that took place in 1986 when Democrats and Ronald Reagan got together, they are in line for some very disappointing times. Our former colleague, Senator Bradley, who served on the Finance Committee with such distinction, was a key author of the '86 Reform Bill, called a couple days ago, and I explained to him what was going on. And he was just incredulous. He couldn't believe that this was going to be the process and that it would be all over in a matter of weeks, and that it wouldn't even be like health care, with the debate moving in fits and starts, stretching out over months. This, if Republicans have their way, as my family used to say, is going to be over lickety-split. And it's coming up quickly. The House plans to offer up a bill in about a week. And the Ways and Means Committee is going to jump into action. The Senate bill could come out a matter of days later, and then it would be the Finance Committee's turn. Now, as most people in the Senate know, there's a normal process for these debates in committee. You usually put out draft legislation, you refine your ideas, you update your work, you share with both sides of the aisle ideas that would make sense, that get both sides to say, hey, bipartisanship is about taking each other's good ideas. Politics is about taking each other's bad ideas, and in this case, it's not about trying to make any bipartisan efforts at all. The normal process involves exercising a little patience, giving the officials at the Joint Committee on Tax and the Congressional Budget Office a time to really make sense of what the numbers mean. This is not Washington lingo. What do the numbers mean? for middle-class people, the folks who are really hurting now, walking on an economic tightrope, trying to pay bills. We ought to make sure that people who are knowledgeable about this have time to really look at the numbers and give us some general sense of what this means, particularly for America's hardworking middle class. But for this partisan tax cut, and a process that will be hyper-partisan, it's designed to be an off-ramp to partisanship only. Republicans are just blowing right by those steps that constitute the normal process I've described. The Congress is headed for a debate on legislation that has the potential to reshape our entire economy at a crucial time when we understand the challenge from global competition and change. But Republicans, as of now, aren't going to wait to see the facts and figures. Never mind that the bill is going to affect every taxpayer in the country in one way or another. Republicans have said, we're going to do some leaping without the looking. They may not even have legislative hearings to examine the Republican tax cut bill and what the impact of it could be. And that was what Senator Bradley was just stunned about, because he and others worked for months, months with the Reagan administration trying to do what is normal and as of now is not going to happen. What is even more ominous is if the bill clears the Finance Committee, the debate on the Senate floor happens in a flash. That's because Republicans, since day one of this administration, Leader McConnell has said this repeatedly, have said they want to use the most partisan process around to move the tax cut. It's another round of what's called budget reconciliation. What this comes down to is a rejection of the kind of bipartisanship that's been proven to work on tax reform. Ronald Reagan worked hand in hand with Democrats on tax reform in 1986. The two sides brought forward their best ideas. They worked for months and months, and as Senator Bradley told me, several years. There were dozens of hearings that dug into the specifics and carefully examined the issues. After the bill came out, the committee met over 18 days to debate and vote on the amendments. There was committee consideration, what's called a markup, that lasted a total of more than 45 hours. Then the bill came to the floor of the Senate, and as is fitting for a piece of legislation that can reshape the whole American economy, debate took almost a month. That's the textbook of how you successfully write bipartisan tax reform legislation. And by the way, that's the model where our former colleague Dan Coates, now a member of the Trump administration, worked with me to produce a bipartisan federal income tax reform bill. But we're not going to see any of that kind of work as of now, this time around. The road the majority is taking us down in 2017 makes a mockery out of the bipartisan process where Ronald Reagan and Democrats came together. As of now, there'd be 20 hours of debate. 20 hours. That's it. On a bill that would transform the bottom line for every American family and will affect the hopes and aspirations of our middle class, which drives 70% of the economic activity in our country for years and years. Then the debate's over, time to vote. So what I'm going to try to do here and we'll be talking often in the days ahead, is trying to lay out what this really means for hardworking middle-class people. Because so far what we've seen is kind of one hand giveth and the other hand taketh away. The details for the top of the top, the mega wealthy, are spelled out, and yet we don't see exactly how the middle class is not going to go into the hole. Because as of now, the numbers suggest, particularly if you have a couple of children and you're in a place with high state and local taxes, you really could fall behind. And if we don't spell out what is actually at stake here and give the American people the opportunity to tune in and be heard, this process is just going to race by before anybody notices. And that is what Republicans are counting on. That's because the bottom line is that when the middle class and the American people find out what is in the Republican tax plan, as is known today, the less they're going to like it. And there have been sort of two versions of it. The first came out, I believe it was late in the spring. It's a page long, shorter than the typical drugstore receipt. We got a bit more information a few weeks ago. But in both instances, as I've described, it looks like the middle class is going to get hurt, and folks who are successful and those who are at the top of the top are going to basically get even more. We want Americans, all Americans, to be successful. We want to give everybody the chance to get ahead. But we don't want tax breaks skewed to the very top. As of right now, the Republican tax plan is a feast for the very wealthy, and the middle class is on the menu. Even the president's top campaign advisor on taxes said that Republicans have made $4 trillion worth of promises in this tax proposal, perhaps even more. But because of budget rules, that price tag has got to come down to $1.5 trillion for the bill to get through the Senate. That means somebody's got to pay for a whole lot of that $4 trillion of corporate goodies and handouts to the wealthy. But Republicans seem almost allergic to raising revenue by asking those at the top to pay their fair share. Every proposal Republicans put forward to pay for this tax giveaway to the top reaches right into the pockets of the middle class. Take the elimination of the state and local deduction. It'll cause pain for millions of Americans across the country, not just in the West, in places like California and Oregon or the Northeast. It's going to hit folks in scarlet red areas that voted for the president on Election Day, North Carolina and Georgia, Wisconsin and Texas. Then there's the plan to double the standard deduction while simultaneously getting rid of personal and dependent exemptions. When you cut out all the tax lingo, as I've said, one hand giveth, the other hand taketh away. What it means, based on the information out now, is that a family of 6 in Medford, Oregon, could see their taxes increase by thousands of dollars a year. That's a holiday surprise. My guess is people are going to say it's the nightmare before Christmas if this plan becomes law. even more middle-class Americans checking on the news over the last few days probably had the wind knocked out of them when they read that their 401k may be on the ropes under the Republican plan. A few days ago, the president said, no, don't touch the 401k. But it seems to me like Republicans just can't help themselves. And when the president was asked about it again, the new Trump position was that middle-class retirements are a bargaining chip to get this lopsided tax handout through the Congress. Let me repeat that last part. The President of the United States says that middle-class retirements are a bargaining chip in this crusade to cut taxes for the most fortunate. Nothing illustrates more clearly how this process has gone horribly wrong, and I want to make clear to the American people, watch the details. Watch the details, because every time a new detail leaks out, the middle class loses. So my bottom line, colleagues, is real tax reform ought to be about putting more dollars back in middle class pockets. But right now, the majority is taking a different tack. It amounts to a hunt for ways to force the middle class to pay for the tax breaks for those at the top. A scheme that will explode the deficit, a con job on the middle class, failed economic policy. But it could rocket through the Congress in the weeks ahead before the American people catch on. So my counsel is everybody ought to strap in and get ready for what's coming. Every step of the way in the Finance Committee and here on the floor, I will continue working with my Democratic colleagues to fight for middle-class priorities and tax reform, and I hope we'll have some from the other side of the aisle join us. And we intend to keep sounding the alarm on a Republican plan that, as of now, gives trillions of dollars in handouts to those at the top while hiking taxes on millions of middle-class families. Madam President, this is really, now that the House has passed its budget, this is kicking off the debate. And the idea that we would have a bunch of fake promises to the middle class, very specific gifts to folks at the top, and somehow unicorn theories of growth that will justify this while really creating deficits that hurt Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and our safety net. Those are the issues that the American people deserve to know more about. We are going to tell them a lot more about the details in the days ahead, because we believe in tax reform that puts the middle class first, doesn't give gifts to the people at the very top, the 1%, doesn't clobber Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, and as Bill Bradley said earlier this week in a conversation to me, is based on the kind of bipartisanship that a hugely important issue like tax reform warrants. Madam President, I yield the floor.